All right, let's get right into it. Today we're doing something a little different. We're not just reviewing a book. We're conducting what one analyst has called a forensic autopsy. Seriously. And our subject? An official textbook published by the state. We're going to be following a devastating critique by Brahim Salem to put this thing under the microscope and, well, see what we find. And right off the bat, our first piece of evidence is a weird one. This is a direct quote from the official teacher's guide that goes with the textbook. I mean, just think about that for a second. The question just jumps out at you, right? Why on earth would the authors need to put in writing that their guide isn't meant to, enslave anyone?
You know, that one sentence, it's basically a giant red flag. It sets the stage for this entire investigation. It's a huge hint that something is seriously, deeply wrong here. So, let's dig in and find out exactly what's going on.
Okay, first things first. Let's formally open the case file. We need to identify the textbook on trial and hear the charges brought against it. And trust me, they are severe.
So the textbook package is called Proceed with English. This is the official stuff for ninth-year students in Tunisia, a really critical time in their English education. The whole package includes the student's book, an activity book, and yeah, that teacher's guide we already talked about.
And here's the indictment. This comes straight from the abstract of Salem's analysis. And wow, these are not light suggestions. The charges are that the book is structurally incoherent, linguistically erroneous, it goes on, pedagogically irresponsible, cognitively damaging, and even actively harmful. The analysis calls it a documented institutional failure. The key thing to get here is we're not talking about a few typos. This is pointing to a total systemic breakdown.
All right, so where do we start digging? Well, any good investigation begins at the source. For a curriculum, that's the teacher's guide. This is supposed to be the blueprint, right? The master plan that makes everything work. And here's the problem in a nutshell. On one side, you've got what a competent teacher's guide should have. Actual stage tasks, timing suggestions, ways to help different kinds of learners, real strategies. And on the other side, Proceed with English. The guidance is stuff like pave the way, or get this, feel free to repeat as needed. Come on, that's not guidance, that's just pointing out the obvious. It offers zero real support for the teacher in the classroom.
And if you're still not convinced, look at this. This is a sentence from the guide itself, from the published guide. Read it with me. Help the students improve their listening skills by listening to the practiced. Listening to the what? The sentence just stops. A key word is just gone. And let me be clear, this isn't some early draft. This is the final, printed, published version that supposedly went through an entire editorial process.
Okay, so the blueprint is a mess, but what about the actual book the students use? Well, now we get to the core evidence. Let's open the case file and look at a few exhibits from the catalog of errors.
Exhibit A. I like to call this one the ghost word. The word is stationaries. Just one problem, stationaries is not a word in English. Stationary is what we call an uncountable noun. But this non-word, it's listed as official vocabulary in the student's book, the activity book, and the teacher's guide. Think about that. An entire country of students is being taught and tested on a word that literally does not exist.
Exhibit B is even more incredible. The book actually teaches mistakes that come from literally translating phrases from Arabic into English. For example, instead of travel the world, it teaches turn around the world. So instead of helping students avoid these common, predictable mistakes, the textbook is the mistake. It's actively creating bad habits that could take years for a student to unlearn.
Okay, Exhibit C. Just flat out wrong facts. A reading passage in the book claims there are 800,000 dog bites a year in the US. Sounds like a lot, right? Well, the actual number, according to the CDC, is about 4.5 million. The book isn't off by a little bit. It's wrong by a factor of nearly 6. That's not a typo. That's not a rounding error. That is a complete and total failure to do the most basic fact-checking. And for our last piece of evidence, Exhibit D, just plain faulty grammar. The book literally tells students that words like so, therefore, and because are for sequencing events. No, they're not. They show cause and effect. This is English Grammar 101, an absolutely fundamental concept, and the book gets it completely wrong. And it's teaching this error as a fact. So you might be thinking, okay, these are bad mistakes, but they're more than just academic points. They have a real human cost. So let's turn from the evidence itself and talk about the victims in this case, the students and the teachers who have to use this stuff every day.
For the students, this book is just brutal. It creates what experts call a high cognitive load. Basically, they get hit with these long lists of vocabulary with no context, confusing grammar rules. They're even asked to do things that are impossible, like pronunciation exercises without any audio. What happens? They get confused, they check out, and worst of all, they experience this thing called manufactured failure. That's when a student feels like they're the one who failed, when the truth is the material failed them from the very beginning.
And what about the teachers? Honestly, the situation is just as bad for them. If you're a veteran teacher, you basically have to throw the guide out and build your own lessons from scratch, which is a ton of extra work. But if you're a new teacher, that lack of guidance is terrifying. It creates so much anxiety. So either way, the entire weight of making the class work falls on the teacher's shoulders. And when the students don't get it, because how could they, guess who gets the blame? The teacher.
I think this quote from the analysis just sums it up perfectly. The teacher's guide is like being handed a map that has no scale and no legend, and being told, here's your navigation support. It looks like a map, it feels like a map, but it's completely useless for actually getting anywhere. It just leaves everyone totally lost.
So, we've seen the evidence. We've talked about the human cost. Now it's time to close the case. It's time for the final verdict, and to ask, how on earth did this happen?
So, how did this happen? Well, the analysis points to something called a closed loop of accountability. It's pretty simple, really. The senior inspectors who write the curriculum, they're the same people who evaluate their own work. And then, that same group approves it for publication. There's no outside review, no one else looking at it. And in a closed system like that, mistakes don't get fixed. They get baked right in. They become permanent.
And this is what you get. This one sentence just captures the whole tragedy. You have teachers whose entire job is to teach language correctly, and they are given a manual that can't even finish its own sentences. How can you build anything on a foundation that's already crumbling? Which brings us to the final critical question. After seeing all this, all these deep, systemic problems, can this book be fixed? Is it salvageable? Can they just, revise it and send it back out?
The author's verdict is absolutely clear. And it's harsh. The problems aren't just on the surface, they're in the DNA of the book. The analysis concludes that the textbook isn't just broken, it's fundamentally flawed in its very design. So the answer is no, it can't be fixed. It needs to be replaced entirely.
And we're left with this one final, really haunting thought from the author. The title of the book is Proceed with English. It promises movement, progress, a way forward. But the book itself, with all its mistakes and confusion, it does the exact opposite. It's not a path forward. It's a dead end. The title says proceed, but the book says stop here.